on It's Supernatural, the journey of Private Gallion. See how God used one man, a private in the U.S. Army, to be the supernatural liberator of concentration camps in Germany. Without this one man, America would not have become a superpower.
Do angels exist? Are healing miracles real? Is there life after death? Can people get supernatural help from another dimension? Has the future been written in advance? Sid Roth has spent 25 years researching the strange world of the supernatural. Join Sid on this edition of It's Supernatural.
Hello, Sid Roth here. Welcome to my world, where it's naturally supernatural. I wouldn't want to breathe any other air. I wouldn't want to live any other way. I have found a 50-year-old secret of the Jewish connection as to why America became a superpower. And there is such a supernatural story connected with this. Mary, when you were a young woman, two prophets prophesied over you, and you didn't have a clue what they were talking about. Tell me about that,
I had no
Mary.
idea. They called me to the front of the church, and the one man said to me, the prophecy came in a form of a conversation. There were two of them. And one of them said to me, "Was your father in the war?" And I said, "Yes," but I was thinking, what does this have to do with church? And he said, "God is going to use you greatly in the nations." And the second man said to him, "Who is she in the sands of time?" And he said, "Her father was the liberator of the German camps, but he hasn't told anyone."
Catch this. Her father was not a liberator of the German camp. Her father was the liberator of the German camps. Continue.
And he said, her father was the liberator of the German camps, but he hasn't told anyone. And he said, "Well, I thought there was not one liberator. I thought there were various people who found the camps by accident as they went across Germany." And he said, "No, there was a journey behind it all. Her father took the journey. He walked many miles." And the man said, "Well, what does she have to do with her father's story?" And he said, "Oh, someday he's going to tell her the story, and she's going to write it, and it's going to mean a lot to the nations of the Holocaust."
Now, you went home, I'm sure, and
Yes.
What did you ask your father?
First of all, I didn't even know what a liberator was. I didn't know what a Holocaust was or a camp. And I said to my dad, "Dad, by the way, there were these two men that told me that you're keeping a war story secret." He said, "Yes, there is a story I've been keeping to myself." I said, "Well, tell me now." And he said, "No, it isn't time yet."
You know what I think is so amazing to me, Mary, is how even before your father became the liberator, which ended up in literally turning the tide and causing America to become a superpower, as you're about ready to find out, even before that, God was sparing his life. Tell me about the time he decided to ice skate on the frozen lake.
Yeah. He was the son of an Italian immigrant who worked him very hard on the farm. So this one day when it snowed, he couldn't wait to go to the river and ice skate in his shoes. But when he reached the river, none of his friends were there. And so he was faced with the temptation of going out by himself. And he said the voice of temptation said to him, "Go ahead, go all the way out to the middle, it'll be fun." So he skated to almost the middle of the river when a soft spot gave way and he fell through the ice. Now the only way out from under the ice was through the hole that his body made when he fell through the ice. But the current carried him away from it.
That has got to be the scariest thing that could happen to someone.
Horrifying. He said he tried to struggle to swim back to the hole, but it was dark under the ice and he couldn't find it. And he reached the point where so many minutes had passed that he needed to breathe. He needed air. And right at that moment, he remembered his mother had lost the son that he was named after, Johnny, and that she would not only grieve his death, but that she wouldn't even know where his body was. And he said his last words under the water was, "It will kill her." And then he said to me, "That was the last thing I remember thinking under the water when I found myself laying beside the water. For the life of me, I don't know how I got there." He looked all around trying to find who rescued him. but there was no one in sight for miles. Then he looked for footprints in the snow because he wanted to follow them and thank whoever rescued him. But there was only one set of footprints in the snow, and they were his.
So you get it? An angel spared his life for a purpose. Now, take me to the moment your father decided to look for the Jewish prisoners that were in the concentration camps.
They were in a place in the Liebstadt area. And it was the time of the war when they had actually pulled over to rest. But a fire lit inside him to keep going. He smelled an odor that gave him a gut feeling that something was not right.
And the thing that's so amazing is that the odor would have been the dying bodies of the Jewish people, but he was very far away from the camp at that moment. He should not have smelled that odor, so it had to be supernatural.
He said to his sergeant, "What do you think that odor is? I get a bad feeling with it." And the sergeant said, "Well, there's rumors that there's labor camps in the area." He said, "Well, give me permission to go and I'll scout and I'll find it and we'll set the people free." And he said, "No, it's too late in the war and, you don't even know what direction you're going in. You just can't go off, not knowing where you're going." But my father said he tried to forget it. But as the day wore on, something kept nagging him and telling him to go and follow the trains, follow the trains. And by the end of the day, the feeling was so strong that when everybody else was getting into their sleeping bags that night, he left to follow the trains. About 3 hours into the journey, he was ready to turn around. His wound that he received at the Rhine River was hurting badly.
Well, he would have been AWOL.
Right, he wanted to also get back in time for morning roll call. But what happened is he had some kind of encounter where at the moment when he thought about, I'm going to turn around now, something pushed him. And he turned around to see who pushed him and nobody was there. And he called it the force. He said the force grabbed me at the elbows and made me continue to follow the trains. And at the same time that it grabbed him at the elbows and made him keep going, he said it also gave him a resurgence of strength and energy that, strengthened him to do this mission.
Listen, what you're about ready to hear, he did not just rescue the Jewish people that were in the concentration camps. He changed the destiny of America. Be back in just a moment. Don't go away.
We'll be right back to It's Supernatural. We now return to It's Supernatural.
Sid Roth here with Mary Nahas. Mary's father was in World War II, and he was a soldier, and he had a compulsion to follow the train tracks because he figured that would lead him to the prisoners, to the concentration camps. So he literally went AWOL. He had a wound. He was walking all. How long did he walk?
He said it was about 3 hours into the journey. He had left about 9:30 at night, and he said it was about 1:30 in the morning when he had the encounter.
Which basically, it's very clear to me, an angel, he was going to turn around, an angel turned him around, infused him with supernatural strength, and he continued, even though he was AWOL, and he was instructed by his superior officers not to go look for the concentration camp. You see, the United States didn't want to find the Jewish people in the concentration camps, but something happened when the liberator followed God. So he continued. What happened?
At the end of the tracks, 5 days later, he found a train car.
He walked for 5 days with the wound?
Yes. He said that he saw American troops camped out, and something just kept telling him not to stray, to keep following the trains. And he did so and reached Camp Dora, where he found a train car filled with dead prisoners that were naked. As he tried to find out who they were by lifting their bodies, he climbed up onto the train car, and he was using his gun to lift their arms and legs to see if he could find a uniform or patch or anything to identify what side of the war they were on, so he could figure out what was going on. But his clip fell off, and a German guard heard him and came running over shooting. And my father said, looking back, it was as though an angel had been shielding him, because The bullets were going on both sides of his ears, whizzing and whistling by, but none of them hit him.
Well, his life was spared many times for this particular purpose. What happened next?
He looked up and he saw a hidden tunnel coming out the side of a mountain, and he knew the Germans had camouflaged it for some good reason. So he knew he had found something big. He went into the tunnel to investigate, but something kept telling him not to go any deeper. So he came back out to investigate the bodies, and that's when the German guard found him. So what he did was, the German guard took off. I guess he didn't want to die that late in the war either. So he went and scouted the camp from on top of the Harz Mountains and found the main entrance of the gate. The prisoners had heard him getting shot at and went to the front gate so that he would realize they were prisoners in need of rescue. And he tried to break the lock by shoving his gun up inside the lock and twisting, but he was unable to do so. So he couldn't go any further. He knew he had to start walking to find help.
Now, this camp was called what?
Mittelbau-Dora concentration.
And what was going on?
Werner von Braun had set up a missile operation in there, and the poor prisoners of that camp were being forced to manufacture the world's first ballistic missile and other weapons. And they were beaten and starved. Muscle men became very weak in a short period of time. It was horrific. They didn't even give them a place to sleep. They were so obsessed with making the missiles. They had to sleep in the cold, dark tunnels. Some of them went blind even. They suffered terrible illnesses.
You told me that they were developing rockets that could go and hit New York City.
Yes.
Literally, if your father had not found supernaturally as the liberator of the concentration camps in Germany, what would have happened to America? You said the History Channel did something.
Yeah, all those missiles at Camp Dora were sitting in the Russian zone of occupation. The Russians would have gotten it all. As the Americans discovered these things, they took them and brought them over to the United States. And Stalin, when he reached the camp, he was livid that everything was gone. They did get the production team and some of the machines. They didn't get the main scientists and 100 of the rockets, which is what we took and confiscated.
Well, you told me that the History Channel did a documentary on this, and they said in the United States we'd be speaking Russian rather than English because literally Russia would have won the ballistic missile race and the balance of power would have changed. But you can see God's hand. I want to find out what God did to spare the Jewish people. What sacrifices he went to. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this video.
We'll be right back to It's Supernatural. We now return to It's Supernatural.
Hello, Sid Roth here with Mary Nahas. And Mary's father was the liberator of the concentration camps in Germany. Because what happened was when they radioed to the other troops to take over the concentration camp and liberate them, the troops actually went to the wrong concentration camp. Tell me about that.
My father radioed the 3rd Armored Division and gave them directions to Camp Dora. But he took the route of the woods for a lot of that scouting mission. And he got a little confused, and they ended up taking the wrong route and ending up at Nordhausen, which was the death camp of Mittelbau-Dora, where the weakest and most, where the Jews that had been through the ranks of camps were on their last dying hours, their last reserves of strength.
Now, your father was so blessed throughout his life for what he did as far as sparing the Jewish people. But not only your father, but you and your children. Yes. Tell me briefly about that. You told me you could write a dozen books about what's happened to you.
We had so many miracles in our family that one day I just tried to figure out why. And I was looking at my father, and I realized it had something to do with him. I don't know how I knew that. And I said, Daddy, it's you, isn't it? You're the reason that we've had all these blessings and miracles. He listens to you. He respects you. But why? What did you ever do in your life to earn his utmost respect and every one of his prayers, your prayers answered? And he said, I saved people, a lot of people. And some of those people were God's people, the Jews.
Now, tell me why you believe that these blessings have come upon you and your family.
I believe we are a living example of Genesis 12:3. I will bless those who bless thee, the Jewish people. My father's journey to Dora not only saved the people of Dora, but the prisoners of Dora were from other camps, like Buchenwald and Dachau. They were building, I think, fuselages, the people from Dachau. So finding Dora caused the liberation of those camps, as the prisoners told where they come from. And the Pentagon, when they learned that the world's first ballistic missile was being made there, they ordered the search for camps.
So they weren't looking for the prisoners so much because of humanitarian reasons.
No.
They wanted to get all of these rockets and ballistic missiles.
Exactly, and they knew that it was all sitting in the Soviet zone of occupation, and there was a very dire need, international crisis that could have happened. And so his journey killed so many birds with one stone. It could have only been the wisdom of God to do such a thing and to send a soldier.
And you told me that God sort of gave your father a sign in all the years that followed on the birth of children and a miraculous dead baby that came back to life.
Yes. My father said to me, you know how I never received any decoration for what I had done to save the people? And I said, yes. And he said, well, God would not let me go undecorated after the war. And I said, what do you mean? How does God decorate a soldier? And he said, the first baby that I had that was born after the war was born dead. She was completely blue from lack of oxygen. The doctor was about to turn around and take her to the morgue when I said, wait. The doctor said, well, what do you want me to do? There's no hope. She's been dead a long time due to the placenta. And he said, we can't just bury her without giving it a try to revive her. And so the doctor worked on her and said he would do it just for my father to make him feel better, but there would be no hope. And in 12 minutes, the color came back into her body and she turned from blue to pink. And in 20 minutes, she started to breathe on her own. And my dad said, it was a miracle. She was born dead and came back to life. And it all happened on the anniversary date of the day I saved the people.
But it wasn't just that particular child. Tell me about the others.
Yes, he said the blessing didn't stop there. To add to that blessing, the baby who was born dead and came back to life grew up. And 20 years later, her baby was born on that same day. And then 20 more years later, my son was born between the liberation dates of Dora and Nordhausen, right during the liberation of both camps. And then a year later, my son, Michael, was born only 1 year later. And I said, Daddy, why was he only born 1 year later instead of 20? And he said God told him it was because he didn't have another 20 years left to live, and God wanted him to tell his story now.
Why is it so important for this story to get out now? I understand you even talked before Holocaust survivors about this.
The Jewish people asked the question. Well, after the war, they searched the written histories looking for that one story that would show that God cared about them and even cared they suffered and they couldn't find it. What they didn't know is that it always existed, but it had been silenced. And so my father wanted them to know that all these babies were not just a blessing for him, that God was actually building a memorial to the prisoners, saying, I remember, and I'm sending you the answer to your question, did I care about your suffering? Not only did I care, but I've given this liberator babies born every 20 years on the liberation date of the camp. And altogether, there were 7 of them. And my father was right that it wasn't just to bless him, because when he died, Chase, the latest one, due date was April 11, the day that my father broke into the camp. So 7 of our babies were born on the liberation dates of the camps that were involved in Dora. Not only Dora, but Nordhausen and Buchenwald, the main ones. And Dachau, my son was born on the liberation of Dachau.
Okay, Mary, I think it's wonderful that these Jews were saved, and if your father didn't do it, these Jewish people and all their extended families wouldn't be here anymore.
Yes.
But where was God with all the Jews that died in the Holocaust?
I believe when I asked my father about this, he asked God, and God showed him a correlation between when he survived the river, and Elizabeth was so elated that he survived because of all the children she had lost. Little Johnny, the one my dad was named after, and the others.
That was your father's mother.
Right. Her real name was Elisabetta. And my father saw that just like Elisabetta, who was so happy he lived because she couldn't bear the loss of one more child.
That was when he fell through the ice.
Right.
Should not have lived.
Exactly. That God blessed my father for those same reasons, had the same elation as Elizabeth over the survival of the few because he was grieving so badly over the millions who died. And my father's conclusion was that he never wanted them to suffer and die in the camps because of this.
And as a matter of fact, you pointed out to me that in the book that there was almost a war going on in the visible world.
Yes.
Explain that.
My father felt that there were forces going on during the war. If the sergeant had given my dad permission to leave on April 5th, he would have reached Dora and Buchenwald before the death marches, before the evacuation of the camps. But people's agendas were interfering. The sergeant was trying to set up only certain people for decoration, and when my dad asked for permission to go, he said no. Had he gone with my dad's hunch, Dad would have received a Jeep, and he would have reached Dora in only a couple hours rather than 5 days worth of walking. And the corpses that were in that train car that my dad said by the looks of the bodies had only been dead a day or two would have been alive.
But why do you believe that Hitler wanted to kill as many Jewish people as possible?
I believe it was a spiritual warfare. I said to God when I was writing the book, show me. You have me writing a book that shows these poor people that it wasn't you who put them there. But I can't give them half the story. If it wasn't you, God, who was it? And I saw the crematoriums he allowed me to see through an inner vision. I saw the smoke of Jewish people going up to the nostrils of God. And I saw Lucifer, who had not been given burnt sacrifice or Messiah, no redemption for him. His is a death sentence. And I saw him screaming to God and saying, here's your burnt sacrifice. Here's your Jews. Which to me showed me that he is so enraged that not that he would want redemption, but he just doesn't want Abraham and his children to have it. So he will do everything to stop it.
Well, Genesis 12:3, God says, I, God, will bless those who bless the Jewish people. And if Christians had been blessing the Jewish people through their prayers, then these forces of evil could not have killed all of these Jewish people. But in that same Genesis 12:3, by the way, one more chance. We're going to have a chance to pray for Jewish people to be spared with the new Holocaust that is coming on Jewish people worldwide. Genesis 12:3 says, I, God, will bless those who bless the Jewish people and curse those who curse them. And in your seed, all the people of the world shall be blessed. Do you know who that seed is? Yeshua, Jesus, the Messiah. And all the people of this earth were blessed through the seed of a Jew. And we're about at the point in history right now where it's not all the people in the world, it's you. The question I have for you is, do you want to be blessed in this life? The first step is to recognize you have sinned. Ask Jesus to wash your sins away, become your Messiah, and live inside of you. Say it out loud, do it now, and start experiencing God's kingdom on this earth now.